Life has a way of placing problems directly in front of us. Sometimes they appear subtly, without warning, and they seem so large that they dominate every thought we have. The mind begins to replay the situation again and again. We analyze it, worry about it, and imagine the worst possible outcomes. Before long, the problem becomes the center of our attention, the center of our emotions, and even the center of our faith. But the truth is that when we focus entirely on our problems, we unintentionally remove our focus from the one who has the power to solve them. Problems have a voice. They whisper fear. They shout doubt, and they try to convince us that the situation is bigger than our hope. They say things like, "There is no way out," or "This will never change," or "You are not strong enough." If we listen to those voices long enough, our perspective begins to shrink. What once seemed like a challenge begins to feel like a prison. Our faith weakens not because God has changed, but because our attention has shifted. There is a powerful principle that can transform the way we face every challenge in life. Whatever you focus on becomes bigger in your mind. If you focus on fear, fear grows. If you focus on fear, fear grows. But if you focus on God, your confidence grows. When your eyes are fixed on Him, the problem may still exist, but it no longer has the power to control your heart. Think about the moments in life when everything seemed impossible. The situation looked hopeless and the path ahead was unclear, yet somehow strength appeared at the exact moment it was needed. Doors opened that you never expected. Solutions appeared that you could not have imagined on your own. That did not happen because the problem was small. It happened because God was greater. When people face hardship, the natural instinct is to analyze the difficulty from every angle. They talk about it constantly. They replay it in their thoughts, and they allow it to dominate their emotions. But there is a better approach. Instead of magnifying the problem, begin magnifying God. Instead of feeding your fears, begin strengthening your faith. Focusing on God does not mean pretending that problems do not exist. It means recognizing that the presence of a problem does not cancel the presence of God. In fact, many of the greatest moments of growth happen in the middle of difficulty. When life is comfortable, people often become dependent on their own abilities. But when challenges arise, we are reminded of how much we need divine strength and guidance. Faith begins to grow when we shift our attention away from what we cannot control and place it on the one who controls everything. The storm may still be raging around you, but when your focus is on God, you realize that the storm is not the final authority over your life. One of the most powerful changes that can happen in a person's life occurs when they stop asking, "How big is my problem?" and start asking, "How great is my God?" That single shift in perspective changes everything. Instead of living in fear, you begin living in expectation. Instead of being overwhelmed, you begin trusting. There will always be problems in life. No one is immune from them. Every person faces moments of uncertainty, disappointment, and struggle. But the difference between a life filled with fear and a life filled with peace is often determined by where a person places their focus. When your mind becomes consumed with problems, anxiety begins to grow. Sleep becomes difficult, joy disappears, and hope begins to fade. But when your mind is centered on God, something remarkable happens. Peace begins to replace worry. Strength begins to replace weakness. Hope begins to replace despair. This kind of focus does not happen automatically. It requires a daily decision. Each morning you choose what will control your attention. You can allow problems to dominate your thoughts, or you can intentionally place your focus on God's presence, His promises, and His power. When challenges arise, instead of immediately reacting with fear, pause for a moment and remember who God is. Remember His faithfulness in the past. Remember the times when He made a way where there seemed to be no way. Remember the moments when your strength was gone, but His strength carried you forward. Gratitude is one of the most powerful ways to keep your focus in the right place. When you begin to thank God for His goodness, even in difficult moments, your perspective begins to shift. Gratitude reminds you that God has been faithful before, and He will be faithful again. Another powerful way to maintain focus. It's through quiet moments of reflection and prayer. In those moments, you step away from the noise of fear and the pressure of circumstances. You slow down your thoughts and reconnect your heart with God's presence. When that connection becomes strong, problems lose much of their power over you. It is important to understand that focusing on God does not always remove the problem immediately. Sometimes the situation remains for a season, but even when the problem remains, the peace of God begins to fill your heart. That peace gives you the strength to keep moving forward when everything around you feels uncertain. Faith grows strongest in moments when it would be easiest to give up. When you choose to trust God, even when the path is unclear, you develop a deeper relationship with Him. That trust becomes a foundation that cannot easily be shaken by circumstances. There are people who spend their entire lives trapped in worry because they constantly focus on everything that could go wrong. But there are also people who live with a deep sense of peace, even during difficult seasons. The difference is not that their lives are easier. The difference is that their focus is different. When your focus is on God, you begin to realize that problems are temporary, but His power is eternal. Situations change, circumstances shift, and challenges come and go. But God remains the same. His strength does not weaken, His wisdom does not fail, and His ability to guide you never disappears. So when the next challenge appears in your life, remember that the problem does not deserve your full attention. Your focus belongs to the one who has never failed, the one who sees the end from the beginning, and the one who is able to turn even the most difficult situations into something meaningful and powerful. Every person experiences moments when life feels heavy and overwhelming. Problems appear, sometimes unexpectedly, and they demand attention. The mind begins to analyze every detail of the situation, replaying conversations, imagining outcomes, and searching for solutions. Before long, the problem becomes the center of your thinking. It occupies your thoughts in the morning. It follows you throughout the day, and it keeps you awake at night. The challenge itself may be real, but the danger comes when the problem becomes the primary focus of your life. What you focus on has an incredible influence over how you feel, how you think, and how you respond to life. If your attention is constantly fixed on the difficulties around you, those difficulties begin to grow in your mind. They appear larger than they actually are. The more you stare at them, the more powerful they seem. Fear begins to develop, doubt starts to whisper, and your confidence slowly weakens. It is not because the situation has necessarily become worse, but because your focus has magnified it. Imagine looking through a magnifying glass. A small object can appear much larger when viewed through that lens. In the same way, when you constantly concentrate on your problems, your mind enlarges them. The situation might be challenging, but your focus can make it feel impossible. Your thoughts begin to revolve around what might go wrong. Your emotions become controlled by worry, and your perspective begins to shrink. However, the opposite is also true. When you shift your focus toward God, something remarkable begins to happen inside your heart and mind. Instead of magnifying the problem, you begin to magnify the power and faithfulness of God. The situation may still exist, but it no longer controls your emotions in the same way. Faith begins to replace fear, and peace begins to replace anxiety. Many people spend their lives focusing almost entirely on what is wrong. They talk about their problems constantly. They replay painful moments again and again in their minds. They analyze every possible negative outcome. Without realizing it, they are feeding their fears. Every thought of worry adds more fuel to the fire of anxiety. Over time, that pattern of thinking creates a mindset that expects the worst. But when your focus shifts toward God, your thoughts begin to change direction. Instead of asking, what if everything goes wrong? You begin to ask, what if God is working in ways I cannot see yet? That change may seem small, but it has a powerful effect on your faith. Faith grows when it is fed with the right focus. Faith grows when it is fed with the right focus, just as fear grows when it is constantly fed by negative thoughts. Faith grows when your mind is filled with reminders of God's strength, His promises, and His past faithfulness. When you remember how God has guided you before, your confidence begins to rise. When you reflect on His goodness in previous seasons of your life, hope begins to return. There is a reason why focusing on God transforms the way you face problems. When your attention is centered on Him, you are reminded that the situation you are facing is not beyond His control. No problem is too complicated for His wisdom, and no obstacle is too large for His power. When that truth becomes real in your heart, the weight of worry begins to lift. Consider how different life feels when your mind is filled with fear, compared to when your mind is filled with fear, compared to when your mind is filled with trust. Fear creates tension in your heart. It drains your energy, clouds your thinking, and steals your peace. Trust, on the other hand, brings a sense of calm, even when circumstances are uncertain. It allows you to move forward with confidence because you believe that God is guiding your path. This shift in focus is not always easy. Problems naturally attract attention because they demand solutions. But learning to direct your focus toward God requires intentional effort. It means choosing faith when fear is loud. It means remembering truth when doubt tries to take control of your thoughts. One practical way to do this is by changing what you allow to fill your mind. Instead of constantly thinking about the worst possibilities, take time to reflect on God's character. Think about His wisdom, His faithfulness, and His ability to work through situations that seem impossible. When those truths become the focus of your mind, your perspective begins to change. Gratitude also plays a powerful role in shifting your focus. When you begin to thank God for the blessings that already exist in your life, your attention moves away from what is lacking and toward what is good. Gratitude reminds you that even in difficult seasons, God's goodness is still present. Another important step is learning to pause when worry begins to rise instead of allowing your mind to spiral deeper into anxiety. Stop for a moment and redirect your thoughts. Remind yourself that God is aware of your situation. Remind yourself that He sees what you cannot see and understands what you cannot fully understand yet. When this habit becomes part of your life, problems lose much of their power over your emotions. You may still face challenges, but they no longer dominate your thinking in the same way. Your focus remains steady because it is anchored in something greater than the circumstances around you. The truth is that life will always present situations that test your faith. Difficulties are part of the human experience, but the direction of your focus determines whether those difficulties will control you or strengthen you. When your focus is fixed on problems, fear grows stronger. But when your focus is fixed on God, faith begins to rise, peace fills your heart, and the problems that once seemed overwhelming begin to shrink in the light of His power. Every person encounters moments in life when a problem feels too heavy to carry. A situation appears so complicated, so painful, or so uncertain that it seems impossible to overcome. In those moments, it is easy to believe that the problem has more power than we do. Our thoughts begin to revolve around the difficulty, and we start to feel small compared to the size of the challenge. But one of the most important truths a person can hold on to is this: no problem you will ever face is greater than God. Human beings naturally measure their problems according to their own strength. When we face something beyond our ability to control, fear quickly appears. We look at the situation and think about our limited resources, our limited understanding, and our limited power. Because we are measuring the problem against ourselves, the problem immediately looks overwhelming. But when we begin to measure the problem against God, the perspective changes completely. God is not limited by the things that limit us. Situations that confuse us are completely clear to Him. Obstacles that appear impossible to us are nothing compared to His power. What feels like the end of the road for us may only be the beginning of a new direction that He is preparing. Many times people become discouraged because they focus only on what they can see. When circumstances appear dark or uncertain, it is easy to believe that the future will remain that way, but God sees far beyond the present moment. He sees the full picture of our lives, including the paths that have not yet unfolded. What feels like a setback today may be part of a greater purpose that will only become clear later. There are countless moments in life when people discover that what once looked like the greatest obstacle eventually became the doorway to something better. At the time, the difficulty felt unbearable. The questions seemed endless and the answers were nowhere in sight. But later, when they looked back, they realized that God had been guiding them through the situation all along. This truth becomes powerful when it settles deeply into your heart. When you truly believe that God is greater than any problem, fear begins to lose its grip on your mind. You may still recognize the seriousness of the challenge, but you no longer feel defeated by it. Instead of asking, "How will I survive this?" you begin to ask, "What is God going to do through this?" Faith is not the denial of difficulty. Faith is the confidence that difficulty does not have the final say. Problems may appear suddenly and bring confusion or pain, but they are never outside the reach of God's power. When you trust that truth, your perspective begins to shift. Instead of seeing the problem as a wall that blocks your future, you begin to see it as a moment where God can reveal His strength. Many people discover God's greatest faithfulness during their hardest seasons. When everything is going smoothly, it is easy to rely on personal ability, but when challenges appear that we cannot control, we are reminded of how much we need Him. One of the most remarkable things about God's power is that He often works in ways that people do not expect. Solutions sometimes appear through unexpected opportunities, through the help of others, or through changes in circumstances that no one could have predicted. What once looked impossible begins to unfold step by step, but trust is required during the waiting. When the answer does not appear immediately, people are tempted to believe that nothing is happening, yet many of the most important changes in life happen quietly. While you are waiting, God may be preparing something behind the scenes that you cannot yet see. Patience becomes easier when you remember that God's timing is different from ours. We often want immediate solutions because we want immediate relief from the pressure of the problem. But God is not only interested in solving the problem, He is also shaping our character, strengthening our faith, and preparing us for the future. Sometimes the greatest miracle is not the immediate removal of the problem, but the strength that God gives us to walk through it. That strength changes us. It builds resilience, deepens our trust, and teaches us lessons that cannot be learned any other way. There are many people who can testify that the moments they once feared the most eventually became the moments that shaped their lives in the most meaningful ways. What once felt like the end turned into a new beginning. What once felt like defeat eventually became a testimony of God's faithfulness. When you begin to live with the understanding that God is greater than any problem, you develop a sense of confidence that cannot easily be shaken. You may still feel concerned when difficulties arise, but deep within your heart, there is a quiet assurance that the situation is not beyond God's control. That confidence does not come from ignoring reality. It comes from recognizing that God's power is greater than the reality of the problem. Circumstances may change, situations may become complicated, and challenges may arise unexpectedly, but God remains constant. His wisdom does not fail when life becomes confusing. His strength does not weaken when problems become heavy. His ability to guide and restore does not disappear when circumstances seem impossible. When this truth becomes the foundation of your thinking, you stop living in constant fear of what might happen next. Instead, you move forward with the quiet confidence that whatever comes into your life will never be greater than the power of the God who walks with you. Many people spend their days carrying a heavy weight of worry because their minds are constantly focused on everything that could go wrong. They replay problems repeatedly, thinking about the same situations over and over again, hoping that somehow constant thinking will produce peace. But instead of peace, worry only multiplies stress and drains emotional strength. The mind becomes tired, the heart becomes restless, and the future begins to look darker than it truly is. Yet the moment a person learns to shift their focus from worry to faith, something powerful begins to change inside them. Peace does not come from having a life without problems. Peace comes from knowing where to place your focus when problems appear. When your thoughts are centered only on difficulties, your emotions begin to follow the same direction. Anxiety grows because the mind keeps feeding itself with fearful possibilities. But when your attention turns toward God, your heart begins to receive a different message. Instead of hearing constant reminders of what might go wrong, you begin to remember who is in control. The mind is incredibly powerful. It can either become a place where fear grows or a place where faith grows. The difference is determined by what we allow to dominate our thoughts. When worry becomes the main focus, it slowly convinces us that the future is filled with uncertainty and danger. But when faith becomes the focus, it reminds us that the future is held in the hands of a God who is wise, faithful, and powerful. This shift in focus does not mean that problems disappear overnight. Life will still present moments of challenge and uncertainty. But when your attention is directed toward God, you begin to approach those challenges with a different spirit. Instead of reacting with panic, you begin to respond with trust. Instead of feeling defeated before the situation even unfolds, you begin to believe that there is a purpose and a path forward. One of the most effective ways to shift your focus from worry to faith is through intentional trust. Trust is a decision that must be made again and again, especially during moments when circumstances seem unclear. It means choosing to believe that God is working even when you cannot see the full picture yet. Trust reminds you that just because the answer is not visible today does not mean the solution does not exist. Another powerful way to change your focus is through prayer. Prayer is not simply a routine activity, it is a moment of connection with God. When you pray, you are acknowledging that you are not meant to carry every burden alone. You are placing your concerns into the hands of someone greater than yourself. In that moment, the weight of the problem begins to shift because you are no longer trying to control everything by your own strength. Prayer also changes the atmosphere of the mind. When you speak honestly to God about your worries and fears, you release the tension that has been building inside your heart. The mind becomes quieter and clarity begins to return. Many people discover that after spending time in prayer, the same situation that once felt overwhelming begins to feel manageable. Gratitude is another powerful tool that helps redirect focus. When life becomes difficult, the natural tendency is to notice everything that is missing or everything that is going wrong. But gratitude shifts attention toward the blessings that still exist. Even in the middle of challenging seasons, there are always reasons to be thankful. When you begin to recognize those blessings, your perspective changes. Gratitude reminds you that God's goodness has not disappeared simply because you are facing a problem. It reminds you that He has been faithful in the past, and that same faithful in the past, and that same faithfulness continues into the present. Each moment of gratitude strengthens your faith and weakens the power that worry tries to hold over your mind. Over time, these small shifts in focus begin to create a new pattern of thinking. Instead of automatically expecting the worst, your mind begins to expect God's guidance and help. Instead of reacting with fear whenever uncertainty appears, you begin to pause, reflect, and trust. This transformation does not happen in a single day, but it grows stronger each time you choose faith over worry. Peace begins to settle into your life when your focus becomes steady. You no longer feel like your emotions are constantly being pushed back and forth by circumstances. Instead, there is a sense of stability within you. Challenges may still arise, but they no longer control your inner world in the same way. Strength also begins to grow through this process. When your focus is on God, you are reminded that you are not facing life alone. His strength becomes a source of courage when your own energy feels weak. His wisdom becomes a guide when your path seems confusing. His presence becomes a comfort during moments when life feels uncertain. This kind of strength allows you to continue moving forward, even when answers are not immediate. You begin to understand that every step of faith matters, even when the destination is not fully visible yet. Each moment of trust becomes a building block that strengthens your confidence in God's guidance. People who learn to shift their focus from worry to faith often discover that their lives are no longer dominated by fear. Instead, they begin to live with a quiet sense of assurance. They know that challenges will come, but they also know that God's presence is greater than any challenge they will ever face. In the journey of life, every person will face moments when problems seem overwhelming. There will be days when uncertainty feels heavy, when the future appears unclear, and when the mind is tempted to dwell on fear. Problems will try to demand your attention, pulling your focus toward worry and doubt. But the most important decision you can make in those moments is where you place your focus. When your eyes remain fixed on the problem, fear begins to grow stronger. The situation starts to appear larger than it truly is, and your confidence slowly fades. But when you choose to lift your focus toward God, everything begins to shift. The problem may still exist, but it no longer controls your heart because your attention is anchored in something far greater. God has never asked you to carry the weight of life alone. His strength is available in moments when your own strength feels insufficient. His wisdom is present when confusion tries to cloud your thinking. His peace is able to calm the storms that rise within your heart. When you trust Him, you begin to realize that no problem has the authority to define your future. Every challenge that appears in your life is an opportunity to deepen your faith. Instead of allowing problems to pull you into fear, you can allow them to push you closer to God. In those moments of trust, your faith becomes stronger, your perspective becomes clearer, and your heart becomes steadier. Life will continue to bring situations that test your patience and your courage. But when your focus remains on God, you will always have a foundation that cannot be shaken. Circumstances may change, problems may rise and fall, but the faithfulness of God remains constant through every season of life. So whenever difficulties appear and your mind begins to drift toward worry, gently redirect your focus back to the one who holds your future in His hands. Because when you focus on God instead of your problems, you will discover that the power guiding your life is far greater than any challenge standing in your way.